Hello, Internet, and welcome back to Brony Remember. My name is Zenith.
My name is Onyx.
And today we're looking at episode 8 of My Little Pony Friendship's Magic, Season 1, Look Before You Sleep, written by Charlotte Fullerton, and first aired on December 3rd, 2010. So this is another interesting episode where we see opposing personalities constantly butting heads. We have Applejack and Rarity getting into an argument during preparations for a storm, and we get to see how Rarity is very much focused on aesthetics and tends to be very vain, whereas Applejack is very much a practically minded individual who's not afraid to get her hooks dirty if it means getting the job done.
Yeah, I mean, what does beauty and stuff have to do when you're trying to tear down a bunch of old limbs from trees and prep for a big storm? I still don't understand why the Pegasus are the one that control the weather, but it's still an interesting concept, and that having failed to do rain or bring in rainstorms for a while, they have to bring in one big storm for a night or whatever.
Yeah, clearly weather works a little differently over there. Yeah, we see Rarity making fusses over really small things that don't matter, because at the end of the day, these trees have to be pruned and trimmed, or else it's just going to be a big mess everywhere, and we can't have that. Of course, their efforts are cut short when the storm begins earlier than they were prepared for, and they wind up seeking shelter in Twilight's library.
Yeah, after trying to do it under a little bench that has mud under it, which I'm still laughing at the fact that they could have just had Rarity levitate the table off of the little mud puddle and use it for cover.
Well, we haven't really seen Rarity use a whole lot of magic at this point, have we? Like, we all know Twilight is...
She's barely used it. It's mostly to levitate, like, small things, like, for decoration.
I think something that goes mildly understated in these early seasons is that most unicorns don't have particularly powerful magic. We are kind of spoiled by the fact that, you know, not to really say that she's more important than any of the others, but the main character in a lot of cases, Twilight, you know, she's particularly gifted as a unicorn, and we don't really see other unicorns get sort of focused as she does, so it's easy to forget that, you know, Twilight's the exception here, even though they make it a point to hammer that home in more ways than one. We just don't see other unicorns doing a whole lot of magic, so it's just kind of not something they put a focus on. And I think it's a lot of missed opportunities, particularly here, where we have both Twilight and Rarity together throughout much of the episode, and they don't really get into, you know, anything magical. That it, in fact, it winds up just becoming a slumber party, which Twilight is particularly excited for because it was, you know, the first ever slumber party she had with friends. So it was a really good setup for a lot of potentially cute moments, but because Applejack and Rarity...
too much bickering.
You know, they don't tend to get along very well. It winds up causing problems.
I think it's funny because this is, I think, the episode where everybody started to ship the two. I could be wrong, though.
There was a lot of that going on, I think. Yeah, that was definitely a thing that was going on for a little while. Something that I really did enjoy about this episode, though, is just the fact that it shows how two people who are almost diametrically opposed in terms of their motivations, in terms of their personalities, and what makes them tick, can still come together and cooperate at the end of the day. Because they spend the entire episode bickering and just butting heads and generally not playing nice with each other.
Which is affecting Twilight and everyone else around them, pretty much.
Yeah, because Twilight, being the nerd that she is, has a book on slumber parties and decides that because everything has to be done by the book, creates a list of activities for them to go through so that she can feel like she's had a true slumber party. And at every turn, her two friends are constantly bickering and trying to outdo each other and just generally making it unpleasant for Twilight.
Yeah. It's definitely an entertaining episode. Considering that Twilight, this is like her first, one of the few things that as a young adult she hasn't done yet somehow.
Well, you just have to remember that she was a recluse for much of her upbringing.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, it wasn't until she went to Ponyville for the first time and met the rest of the main six that she really had any friends. You know, and in fact, she spent most of those episodes insisting she didn't need any friends.
Yeah, although I will have to say it's kind of funny that Twilight just already has all of the things to do a sleepover, like the mud masks and stuff at her library. I wouldn't think Twilight would normally keep that stuff around.
You know, that's fair. I would almost have to wonder, you know, okay, who owned the library before? Right? Because she just kind of moved in and took it over. Who owned the library prior to Twilight coming to town?
Yeah, that's always been something I'm like... At some point I wanted to think it was like the town's public library or whatever. And then they made arrangements or somehow to make it Twilight's home, which is interesting.
Yeah, it certainly seems, you know, pretty much ready for somebody to move in and start properly taking care of it, like in a custodial sort of manner. Maybe it was just a public property like most libraries tend to be. But as far as Twilight having stuff, I mean, who's to say that she didn't get a bunch of gifts when she first moved in?
That, or she just brought a bunch of stuff from Canterlot with her, or had it shipped there afterwards.
Well, in any case, the whole shtick behind this episode, you know, the two opposing personalities having to set aside their differences, this I think was a really good thing to sort of drive home early on in season one. Because oftentimes, you know, especially nowadays, people don't like to do that. You know, they just kind of get stuck in their ways. They just don't really like to cooperate with people that rub them the wrong way. They would rather just not interact with them at all. And
yeah, that's true.
Showing here that, you know, it is possible to set your own personal stuff aside in order to help somebody else. I think it's something that a lot of people really need to sort of relearn and really just internalize. There's just too much nastiness in the world these days, and it's episodes like this that really make me appreciate the lessons that they were trying to show 13 years ago that I think are more relevant now than they probably ever have been.
Yeah, that is definitely something I wasn't thinking about when I first watched this, but you're right.
So throughout the whole episode, I mean, they go through so many different things. I mean, like you said, they have the mud mask. You know, they go through telling scary stories. They have a pillow fight.
Oh, yeah, the pillow fight. Yeah, Twilight's scary story was kind of silly.
Well, sure. I mean, how many scary stories do you think a nerdy book horse is going to have? You would think all of them.
Actually, I mean, we don't really get a whole lot of Twilight's story, scary story, because they kind of like skip half of it. I think it's actually AJ's and Rarity's stories are kind of just like, those aren't scary.
No, they're really not.
I mean, they're targeted at each other, but whatever.
I like this bit here where they go and make like s'mores.
Oh, yeah.
It's not something that I ever really would have thought about during, like, a sleepover.
No, I mean, unless you have a fire pit outside or you feel like turning on the gas stove and roasting marshmallows over that.
But it's impressive how they turn even something like that into an argument, because AJ being a country gal, of course, doesn't really have table manners.
No, she definitely does not have table manners.
Yeah. Meanwhile, they get into even more arguments, and Twilight's trying to figure out
what the heck is going on.
But what's going on? Because nothing that's going on is in the book, and of course we can't have that.
Yeah, Twilight referencing this thing. I don't think this is how this works.
Because, God forbid that they just make things up as they go, right? No, it's got to be done by the book.
Yep.
And, of course, Twilight would have a book on slumber parties. I wonder if there's anything Twilight doesn't have a book on.
Yeah, that's the better question. What book does she not have a reference of or for?
It seems like every time that they're out there trying to figure something out, she's got a book.
I mean, especially in these first couple seasons, she doesn't really seem to use them as much in the later seasons.
Does she retain much of a library? I don't remember.
I mean, she has an even bigger library once she gets her upgrade.
Yeah, but they would have all been books imported from somewhere else, right?
Yeah, considering that this library no longer exists.
But that's spoilers for much later on. It's really funny trying to go through and tie everything back into itself in hindsight.
Mm-hmm.
When you know what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's hard not to spoil anything for new viewers of the show.
Well, and there's so many things. There's just so many things that get called back to later on. Even some really surprisingly small details get mentioned, and you just never really know what's going to stick and what's not. And there's really not a lot in this particular episode that I can recall sticking around. Like
no.
There's not really many callbacks to this particular episode, which I think is kind of a shame. Not that I think that this is a particularly great episode. It's not a bad episode, but there's a lot.
It's not bad, but it's kind. I feel like it was a filler.
It definitely had that vibe of filler episode, but it had
a good lesson.
Yeah, it was really good to see, these two characters that I think in any other given situation, in any other given situation, they would have nothing to do with each other. And here they are forced to not just coexist, but actually behave because that's what their mutual friend wants.
Yes.
And I personally, I don't think I can come up with a more oppositional pair than these two.
Rarity and Rainbow.
You think so?
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, there's a whole episode on it much later. I think season 8 or something. 8 or 9. I don't remember. That's pretty much this episode is just replace Applejack with Rainbow Dash.
I mean, yeah. That's fair. I don't know. It just seems like Applejack was always the better foil for Rarity just because, AJ never really cared about getting dirty at all. Rainbow Dash, it was just kind of whatever, but AJ, much of what she does requires her to get her hopes dirty.
Yeah, that's true. I'm trying to think of which of the main 6, the combination, or the pairings, I should say, get more episodes than the others.
I know I saw a list on that. I know somebody's gone through and done a list on that.
There probably is. I know AJ and Rainbow get paired up a lot.
They're a pretty fun pair. You've got two athletic characters who both have very competitive streaks.
Right.
Oh, they're going to get paired up against each other quite a bit. Can I just also say really quick, I love, because I've got the episode playing on my other monitor here. I love that the little tiny tip of that tree outside, multiplies several times over the moment they bring it into the library.
Yes, I'm at that scene too, where they just... yoink it inside, and I'm like, that little tip is now like 10 times the size it was when it was outside.
It was a tiny little like treetop, and now it's a whole brand new tree.
Yeah. And then Twilight obviously getting upset over it and referencing the book. It's like, there's nothing about a tree branch crashing into the room.
To be fair, I think just about anybody would be upset at a whole nother tree just getting yoinked into their bedroom.
Oh, yeah.
But this is the point, like, where we see, AJ and Rarity finally putting their crap aside and actually working together to take care of things and, make everything okay for Twilight.
Yeah, I still have to laugh, though, at the rain that just seemingly comes in at a weird angle, and I'm like, I don't think that much rain would be getting in through that tiny little window.
Maybe.
It's whatever.
Trying to apply real world logic to, cartoons
is impossible.
Jim, I just had another thought occur to me. How many other episodes do we see where AJ isn't wearing her hat most of the time?
Oh gosh, that's a good one. That's a good question. I'm sure somebody has gone through and made a list of that as well.
I just noted, okay, she's wearing it again here now. She's about to close the window. But for most of the episode, she doesn't have her hat.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it's weird seeing her without the Stetson.
I think there's another Rarity Applejack episode where Applejack's hat just gets completely destroyed at some point. I don't remember which one. She has her hat on again.
Yep.
I think it might just be a bunch of animation errors in this, or inconsistency with the animations.
It's probably just inconsistency because, they were both in bed, right? Like, I don't think AJ's ever shown going to bed with the hat on.
That's true, but it's like the scene right before this one, when she's trying to get the tree out. She doesn't have it on for most of that scene, and then right as she's helping Rarity take the rest of the tree out of the library, she has her hat on. It does not make sense.
No, it doesn't.
And then Twilight, oblivious in her book, is always going to be funny.
Oh, yeah. Every time Twilight has her nose buried in a book sometime and missing literally everything that's going on will never not be funny.
Yep, especially when she looks up and is like, oh, here's 2 little topiaries. Where'd those come from?
Which, that actually is a really good glimpse into what Rarity can do as a unicorn.
Right.
Like, we can see that, she's got some talent, just as a fashionista, she can weave and manipulate cloth. But to see her manipulate other objects into, things like, hedge-trimmed animals, it's not something we see from her very much.
Yeah. Then again, I think we've discussed this before, that most unicorns don't have, like, the mana reserves that, like, Twilight has, or magical reserves, whatever you want to call it. So, obviously she can't do huge spells like Twilight.
No. On the topic of magic use really quick, I think it's just a minor detail that I think is worth pointing out. In the first 2 episodes, whenever we see a unicorn using magic, the only thing that happens is there's just a bunch of sparkles. Now we're seeing an actual proper glow around their horn and around whatever object they're manipulating. But it's fairly transparent still, and there's not a whole lot of color to it. And that's going to change as the series goes on.
Yeah, I definitely think it's interesting to see that the glow changes per character. Like, obviously Twilight's becomes darker, more of a magenta over the violet that it is right now, or the really light pink.
Yeah, it becomes more vivid.
Yeah.
And then Rarity's goes from kind of just a really pale blue to almost like a royal blue that matches her eyes.
Yeah, that's magic in this universe is whack. It's very interesting though.
The small details like that when you're going through it and watching each of the episodes, and you're not having to wait a week or more in between. Things like that are a lot easier to catch for me personally, and it's always fun to see how small details like that evolve, because they could have just kept it one way or the other the entire series.
Right.
But yeah, there's not really a whole lot more to this particular episode. It's just another classic early series episode featuring a bunch of our favorite characters. In fact, these three are really almost the only characters that we see in this episode.
They are the only characters. I was always wondering what happened with Spike not being there.
Yeah, Spike being absent is certainly interesting. And I mean, we see a couple of Pegasi in the first couple of scenes, putting clouds everywhere. But yeah, we really only see these three, and that's really weird for
it
even
is,
season
but
one.
It's also, I feel like the way they did the episode, it makes sense that they only need the three characters. They don't need to put a bunch of background characters and stuff, because 90% of the episode takes place in Twilight's library.
Right, there's no need for random characters outside everywhere. But it is an interesting contrast, because most other episodes up to this point have been, filled with background characters at some point or another.
Right.
It makes this particular episode seem like
more personal.
Well, not just more personal, because the focus is just on these characters, but it really makes the whole episode feel a little like visually hollow. Like, it adds a sort of like eeriness to it that I don't think would have been present if we'd seen more of the storm preparation, from the other characters, if we had seen, just other things.
Yeah. That is true.
So, yeah, I think that just about wraps up this episode. I've been Zenith.
I'm Onyx.
And we'll catch y'all next time for Bridal Gossip. Have a good one.
Yay.